afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for us to be here and to try out this new format. At least it's new to me. So we don't have a moderator. We have, however, cards that were prepared by the co-forum that we will use to discuss some topics. And I think the cards contain questions for us. So first of all, let me introduce Marie Riemann, who is the founder and co-director of Voraus, the Swiss foreign policy think tank. Marie has been trained in international relations. She has, I think, a BA in international relations, and then she did a master's in environmental governance. So she's an expert in different fields, including citizen participation, water governance, and she worked in different places, all in different countries: Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Netherlands, Switzerland. So I'm really pleased to be with you at the table, Mike.
Thank you very much. I'm also very pleased to be discussing with you with this format I've never used, although I'm really used to a participatory format, but this one is new, so be patient with us. I'm really glad and honored to be able to speak with you, Christian. You are the executive director of Albert Eichmann Center on Democracy. You're also a senior lecturer here at the graduate. You have been working on democracy's processes, on youth engagement, but I've also seen, looking at your life, that we share also some common interests beyond youth engagement and democratic processes, also food security, agricultural practices. So yeah, I think we share a lot of different common interests, and let's, I guess, dive in. Yeah. I will ask you then the first question.
Please go ahead.
Can participatory democracy work without personal responsibility?
Participatory democracy and responsibility, this is a very good and very tough question, actually. So, in fact, when designing participatory methods or spaces, one thinks of creating a space for engagement and also for making collective decisions. So I think in the first place, personal responsibility is about engaging and also playing the game by the rules, but then the responsibility blends into the collective responsibility for the outcome. So that would be my kind of succinct reply. Marie. What is one conversation society is currently avoiding but urgently needs to have?
Tough question. There are multiple, I think, discussion we urgently need to have, but I cannot help but be inspired by the heat I'm feeling. I believe one urgent conversation we need to have is not only how, where to find the next ventilator or whatever we need to feel a bit less heat, but also how we actually deal with climate change in our policy making processes. And today is definitely the right moment, but yesterday was probably the right response. In a polarized world, sorry, this word is really hard to pronounce it. How do you remain open without losing our convictions?
Well, so I think this is the question of our days. Polarized societies and polarized, I would say, informational environments. And how to be, what is the question, how do you remain open? So I think as a we would need to think of we as a society, and here I think democratic institutions have a clear responsibility, and as a we, it's also individuals, so how do we share, read, critically look at information ourselves in our daily lives. So I think it's a matter of joining forces in order to in fact, be open and be open to the other's point of view. So here, I think in the question there is a word of convictions, and I think this is, I'm reminded about one quote from Albert Hirschman, who already in the 1990s was saying that one of the dangers that he was seeing for democracies, and it was well before social media and the digital spaces of today, was the overproduction of opinionated opinions. That was his warning. And I think the very conviction that we might feel we have needs to be also very gently and very openly be open for discussion. So don't be sticking to our convictions, but do, maintain a very open gaze and critically look at the information that we consume. Marie, what role should young people play in shaping the future of democracy, and what do older generations need to hear from them?
I would actually look at this question a bit differently, because I believe when we keep on having this dichotomy between young versus older generation, we keep on creating this divide between the two, as the young should be the ones who are right, or in other contexts the older generation have wisdom, etc., etc. And I would say what roles should both play is being curious from one another, and try to get out of stereotypes that we may have on the generation below us or above us. Because, for instance, there is this book from a French journalist, Salomé Saké, who wrote about youth in today's world. And what I found really interesting in her book is that she portrayed that every generation seems to say that they know better than the younger one. And that's something we see across history. So that's nothing special about boomers or older generation today, but it's something we see across history. And I think if we look at also the way we see one another, I guess that would be my response, like being curious from one another and trying to work together and going beyond the stereotypes we may have from one another. But I would still say older generation should also leave the space for younger. I agree. What gives you hope when you look at democracy today?
Well, I think, there are several motives of hope, and I'm, as was said earlier also, I'm part of those optimistic person. However, the anxieties we have and the concerns and the challenges that democracies and societies are facing. And what I think I would reply as an example or one really telling process is the mobilization of Gen Zs all around the world since a couple of years. We spoke a lot about it last year in 2025, but it started also earlier. And these mobilizations were, and still are, because they are continuing, so oriented towards bringing change to society, to political systems as well, in a peaceful way, and also in a way to denounce the unequal access to not only political representation but also to resources, economic resources, to also against the massive corruptions and ineffective governments. So it translated into also very, very specific claims around the need to have public hospitals well functioning, as it was the case in Mexico, in Madagascar as well, about infrastructure. So I think this gives us also a sense of what younger generations feel about societies and the need of governments to fulfill those needs. And the very way in which those protests and those mobilizations took place were also, I think, very important from this collective endeavor to bring about change. So I think, Marie, I have a question for you on how do we cultivate the courage to engage with people we fundamentally disagree with?
Yeah, this I found personally hard sometimes. I think we can speak a lot about creating dialogue, creating spaces for discussion. It's also what forums related to any political party, meaning that we also try to represent different minds, different opinions, different political. In theory, that's beautiful. In practice, it's really hard because you have to personally also be to remain calm, respectful, actively listening to someone else who may be opposite to you. And again, I personally believe in that. That's something I want to fight for, and that's something I think we have to protect. But it also starts with personal work. And it reminds me of personal experiences that I had with people that seem to me or have very drastically different belief than me, and I realized that I was feeling anger, or I was feeling a lot of emotion that I was not able to really cope with, and I really had to dive in within myself, actually, even before trying to convince the other, also trying to reflect on, actually I was getting into that discussion to convince the other, so not even to listen to them, or to put them at on the same, almost on the same level than me, but already coming from that place of I'm right, you're wrong. And I think looking into that mirror, I found it super interesting. And at the same time, with realizing that I still have some limit in that, because even though I want to be as open as possible, there are still subjects where I find myself with some limits. That it's really hard to still debate in a constructive way, that it's still possible to hold dialogue on every subject. And I think this balance between working on yourself, being also, how do you say, honest with oneself, that it requires courage, but it also requires to self-reflect on what emotion do you feel, how do you react, which way do you come to that conversation with someone you may disagree. I think this, but this work is necessary. I think we cannot talk in theory about talking to one another, but we actually have to experience it and go through that whole process. If you could leave one message to the next generation about democracy, what would it be?
A message to the next generation. I would also leave it actually to current generations, but I think there is, as you said earlier, I really agree with you as how it's sometimes too easy and maybe not productive to segment society into younger, elder, etc. It could be productive for some conversations, but not always. So I would say for also the world and the democratic spaces that we would like to leave to the next generations, it should be, of course, open, inclusive, equitable, and creative. I think this creativity, and I think President Jacqueline Coté in her opening remarks had a very, very powerful expression to translate from anxiety to urgency. I think this is what I really feel we all need to do in our individual capacity, but also here, I'm part of a research group at the Brandon Institute, and also interacting with many partners. And I think we could facilitate, and we are striving actually in our activities and programs to facilitate this creativity in order to think of the future of democracy, think of it today, and I think this is what also youth leaders, youth movements are telling us. We need to not only think about the future of democracy now, but prepare for it now. It's urgent for all reasons, both for the climate, which really signals that we need to collectively deal with that, but also for the very functioning of an open democratic space. So I think the creativity is also a way to probably talk with one another, besides different political, ideological views, but create also imaginations for the future is really important across the society. And I think we have time, if my watch is okay, for maybe one last question that I would ask you, Marie. But here I see my name, so it's not. Okay, here. If democracy were not only a political system, but also a daily practice, what would it look like?
So if we think about democracy as a system in terms of who is ruling, which type of law we have, etc., and then how it, I would say, translate into daily practices. How do we, for example, in this room, live with one another? How do I make sure that my neighbor feels comfortable? How do I make sure that you feel, although it's a bit stressful situation, but how do I make sure that you can live your truth as much as I can as well do mine? So I would say looking at more daily practice, that's way more how do we live with one another within our community, within our family, within our friends group, and how do we make sure that this is nourishing for everyone in it, beyond then the actual forms and institutional settings.
I find this very inspiring. So I think we are over with, we are done at least with the timeline. Thank you very